Greetings, everyone. Today we're going to start our very first project for Intro to Studio Art. Today we're going to be covering drawing, and I'm going to go through some of the basic steps to get you started. And this is going to be a two-part project, which I'll talk about a little bit later. You can find the assignment on Blackboard for specifics. And I'm also going to be posting a quick PDF slideshow with examples that you can reference along with this video. So let's get into it. Today what we're going to do, if you may have guessed by the image that I posted here, is we are going to be drawing our hands. We all have them accessible to us. So with that in mind, it's a great still life to get started. It's a complicated object, but we're going to go through the basic steps to make it successful. So what I need you to do first is to locate your Bristol pad and simply remove a sheet so that we may begin drawing. When you open this, fold the top all the way back so you break this seal. And then when you remove a piece of paper, out along the edge like that so you get a nice clean rip. And why don't we go into the document camera so I can show you what we're going to be working with today. Now I'll go through the basic steps, get you to a point where you can really finish this up. And when you finish, you're going to be photographing it and submitting it to me so I can review it. So let's go into the other camera so we can view our materials, what we'll be working with today. All right, so this is a variety of things that we're going to be working with. Again, as I went over in the kit, we have a variety of pencils. Immediately, just remove these two orange ones. We're not going to be using charcoal pencils today. What you want to do is make sure that you have a nice surface to work on. This mat that I'm working on is really nice and solid. If you need to, you can also just simply flip around the backside of your pad. And you know, what is often helpful for me anyway, is just to, if I'm going to do that, if I put this on the pad, so that I don't get any creases, I may just tape down the edges a little bit. So here I've just got a few pieces of tape, and I'm just going to tape down the edges so that this page doesn't move too much. All right, so here's the basics of what we're going to be doing today. Essentially what we're going to work with is drawing our hand. So the thing that I want you to do first is to just take a quick look at your hand. Check out the shape, the proportions, and the placement of the elements of your hand, right? Consider which digit is a little bit thicker, a little bit thinner, a little bit longer, where it's positioned, and what's the overall general shape that you have to work with. Now, the very easiest way for us to understand making a drawing is by considering the outline of an object, right? So the outline has to do with essentially the perimeter. What shape do we see for the perimeter? So the easiest way to do that is to just simply trace it. I think we've all probably done this before. What I want you to do is just locate your HB pencil. This is a good middle of the road, not too light, not too dark pencil. And just simply take it and trace your hand. Try to keep the pencil as vertical as you can. Go slowly. Try to fit in all the contours as you go. Don't want to press down too hard. The paper is thick. It's actually made of cotton and other materials. If you press down too hard, it'll leave an indentation, which sometimes will show up later on when you're starting to fill in tone, add other lines, things like that. So don't press too hard, just enough to make a mark, and go all the way around. Make sure you include the wrist. All right. So what we should have is a basic kind of outline drawing like that. Let's see what happens if I turn the lights on. Does this help at all? Does not seem to help. Maybe a little bit. I think it's a little better. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so you can see this better. There we go. So I've got a basic image of the hand. I'm going to try to add this a little bit brighter. Oh, that's a little bit better. Okay, oh, we're cooking. So I've got my hand, and what I want to do now is I really want to just look at this in comparison. So if I put my hand next to this hand, what I want you to do at any time you make a drawing, when you start with some sort of line or shape, I want you to think about editing it, okay? I don't want you to think that drawing is moving from point A all the way around to point B. It has to be a process of editing and layering. We don't need to get it perfect on the first try. We want to go through multiple steps in order to get this right. So when I look at this finger, for example, when I look at it in comparison, this looks awful thick. So what I'm going to do now is just simply kind of like trim this down a little bit. Just make the contour a little bit better. So I want you to go through your drawing and just sort of see if there's ways that you can improve the contours, make it, maybe a little bit slimmer, a little bit more contoured as you go through and adjust. And while you do this, confirm the lines a little bit more, make them a little bit darker so that you get a really nice balanced kind of composition. Okay, so as I go through this, again, I'm looking at my own hand. I'm starting to notice that some of the lines go into it instead of just around it. You notice my thumb here, the lines cross over, so I'm going to add that. I also notice there's a little bump here. The thumb is actually sideways as opposed to the other fingers, which are facing up. So I want you to consider that as you're making these marks as well. You notice a little bit of the knuckles that are overlapping as we're coming down into this composition. So again, we're making it a little bit darker, okay? We are trying to notice. So drawing is about making a record of what we notice, all right? So remember, it's not magic, although it is creating that illusion. The illusion is that we're taking two-dimensional surface and we're giving it the illusion of depth and dimension, creating an object that looks like it's three-dimensional somehow, okay? So finally, just going through, kind of confirming my lines. Again, don't do this haphazardly. I really want you to look. The way that I think about it sometimes is watching a tennis match. The ball is going back and forth from player to player across the court. In this case, as you're drawing, you're looking at your hand, you're looking at where you're drawing and going back and forth between them. All right, so I've got a confirmation of the outside of my hand. I'm pretty happy with it. I feel like that looks like my hand and the outline of it. So the next thing I want to do again is look closely. So we have an outline form. That's a very great best step to start with the drawing. Sometimes your drawing starts from the middle and works its way out. Sometimes it starts from an outline and works its way in. But in our purpose for today, for this hand drawing, the outline is a great way for us to start. So next I'm going to zoom in and I want us to notice something that we call contours. Contours of your hand. So let's just like take a look at my fingers here. I'm going to focus a little bit. Okay. Now, what makes these hands look more realistic as opposed to a silhouette like we have on the page are the lines of the creases of my hand. Notice how they don't go straight across, they actually curve around the finger because my finger is actually a cylindrical shape. So there's a curvature to it. And that curvature helps to give it dimension and form. So the next step that I want you all to do is to think about adding interior contour lines. Any of these lines that you see, okay, especially the major ones, the darker ones, right? That would include the fingernails. So we look at the way that the line goes around here, the space of that, maybe even some of the broad lines going across. Any of those lines I want you to add to this step next, right? So let's zoom back out. Let's take a look at what we have. Okay, so if I look at, make a comparison here, when I look at my pinky, I can see, now I'm going to draw really lightly to begin with. I'm not going to draw a heavy outline like I did before. I'm going to sketch with some basic sketching lines to get the shape I want, and once I like the shape, I'll confirm it with a finer, more dark line. Okay, there I go. There's my fingernails. I can start to see the overall shape of them, the curvature, the way that they still have a little bit of finger space in between the nail and the rest of the finger. Okay, I do have the cuticle. The curve of the cuticle is apparent. I'll look at each one of these. These fingernails are a little bit broader, so I'll draw those in. Okay. And again, you want to really make that comparison between the two, the hand, your physical hand. By the way, don't trace the hand you draw with. trace the other one so you have a good reference you can look at. Now the thumb, check out the thumb here. It's pitched to the side, so I can't draw that in the same way, right? I've got to think about the space here between the flesh and where the nail starts, and then the direction of this curve, which kind of goes down a little bit, right? And then this curves up into there like that. All right, so there we go. Got some nails. The other thing we'll look at is any places, any creases that you may have. You know, if you're older like me, you've got a lot of creases. If you're young, you may not have very many, but some sort of contours that start to show the direction. And any of these lines I can kind of wrap around a little bit are going to be helpful as well. So we're going to add in some of these lines, these contours. Also notice here, I see this line go in and into my hand a little bit, and I want to include that because that's important. It's going to come down like this. It's going to go into my hand a little bit more, like that, and this one. So there's this sort of webbing between the hands. The finger extends into that a little bit. I also have, you know, tendons that I can see. They're not a heavy, dark line per se. They're not as sharp of an edge as some of these lines are, but they're certainly there. So I'm just going to sketch in light lines. I'm going to add some of these contours in so you can see what I'm working with. I guess I got to move my hand away so you can see some of these elements I'm adding. Okay, further lines, I'm going to add in some of these that kind of start to contour in around the thumb. I'm going to include, further lines. My ring is interesting too because it curves around the hand here in both directions, and I get the dimension of that ring coming through, so you can see that. Okay. It also, my finger kind of overlaps around it because it's like squeezing in the flesh of my finger, so it kind of bulges around the sides. I've got more of these contours of the creases of my hands. And finally, you know, the pinky, adding in some of those details. Okay, anywhere that you see line, whether it's subtle or whether it's dark, I want you to think about adding that stuff in. Okay, we've got an outline drawing. Let's focus. There we go. We've got an outline drawing. We've got some contours going. And this is shaping up to be a pretty decent line drawing. We've been slowly working with the HB pencil. I've not done any erasing. If you do need to do erasing, I want you to go ahead and get the kneaded eraser out. All right. Open it with my teeth. And for this, there's another wrapper on here that's like double wrapper. All right, so this is like a piece of chewing gum, although don't chew it, it does not taste very good. And you can stretch it, which is nice. You knead it like a piece of dough. And this is a great eraser because you can lightly go in and erase elements out. You can also soften lines so they're not so dark. And what I'm doing now is just kind of cleaning up around it, getting rid of any of the lines that I didn't want in here, and confirming. Now, once this gets like a dark residue on it, you can just simply knead it a bunch and that will go away, kind of work itself into the fabric of the eraser, and then it's good to work again. You can also pinch it to a little bit of a point, and you can use that to erase with more detail. Okay, so I'm just cleaning this up before I go to the next step. So I started this drawing off with the HB pencil, okay? And just as a quick guideline, let's take a look at the differences between the densities of the leads. All right, it's not actually lead, it's graphite, but they do call it leads. So we have in the kit, we have a 2H, then we have an HB, and then we have a 2B, all right? So if we start with the 2H, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold the pencil at the back end, not up close like I'm doing a sketch, right? But I'm gonna hold it at the back end, and I'm gonna put my finger on top of it, like this. And I'm just gonna shade with it on the side of the pencil. I'm looking for the long edge of the pencil, okay? And I'm just gonna kind of like put some tone down here, not really putting much pressure down at all. Once you kind of polish it a little bit and shade like this, it'll get smoother, so it'll be easier to add tone with, but you can kind of see the darkness that's been able to apply. If I do the same amount of pressure, the same angle with the HB pencil, okay, holding it the same way, you'll see that we get a little bit darker, right? So the idea here is that the softer the lead or the graphite, the more it squishes down onto the paper, hence applying more of the metallic quality or the metal to the surface. And then finally, the 2B pencil, if I hold that to the side and do that, you can see I'm getting a darker tone as well. Right? And then lastly, we have this really dark layout pencil, same sort of thing. If I do this, we'll get a bit of a darker tone as well, right? If I press this down really hard, you'll get something really, really dark, okay, like that. So you can see already just by switching the pencils, we get a range of tones and values. That's kind of what we're going to be looking for next. To give this drawing some sort of depth and dimension, I have to consider the light, right? With this direct kind of spotlight going over, I wonder what happens if I turn it off. Here you can see a little bit more shading, right? When I turn the light off, you can see that light is coming from this direction and casting shadows on the side. When I look at the shadow of the paper, right, the shadows are along these edges. But not dramatic lighting. I don't have dramatic lighting here, but I do want to think about where it's lighter or darker in the composition, because that will help quite a bit. So with this, I'm going to just take the first pencil, which is that 2H pencil, all right? And I don't see a terrible amount of white. The ring is reflecting the light of the ceiling and the skylights. It's the brightest part of the composition. All of this, if we imagine this in black and white, is going to be a considerable amount of gray. So I'm going to just take my 2H pencil and in one direction, and I don't want to press down very hard because I don't want there to be really strong visible lines, but I'm just going to be shading in most of this area with a gray tone. I'm going to avoid the nails for right now because there is a little bit of a lighter color in some of those. And again, everyone's hands are going to be different in terms of the tonal range and the color of the flesh and the value that it portrays. But I'm just going to, again, it's probably true that your hand is not as bright white as the white of the paper. So you should really consider adding a nice even coat of tone in here. And I don't even care if I go out of the lines, as long as I don't put much pressure down, it'll be really easy to erase and clean it up later on. As we're speaking, I'm watching my children out the window and they're dying to come in here and interrupt this video, which may be the case if they can hold themselves much longer. But I'll try to keep them at bay the best I can. All right, getting some striations here. It's totally normal. We have to kind of make it look worse before we make it look better, right? So that's true of most things in life, I think. Everything goes through a period where things are difficult, maybe like right now, yeah? Being at home in quarantine and things like that. Okay, I've got a good amount of tone here. One thing that helps with making tone really even is by changing direction. I've done mostly in this direction, so if I turn my drawing, I can actually add tone in another direction to fill in more of those spaces, right? So you may want to go over this a little bit to get, you know, kind of the tonal range if you want. What I want you to do with this is make it darker than you think, you know? I think in most cases, we're afraid to go kind of like really, really dark, but the perception of that dark tone is relevant to the amount of other tones that we have on the paper. So because we only really have white and this gray that I'm adding, it may look like it's too dark, but once we add more contrast, that will change quite a bit. So go in at least two directions and really add a lot, you know, of, again, light pressure, long striations of mark making across the page. So you definitely see the texture of the paper, right? So when we zoom into this, you can see the type of marks that I'm making. Okay, so you see that, you can see the grain of the paper, you know, the highs and lows, the peaks and valleys of the paper pulp, and that's what the pencil is hitting. So we want to, and that we'll use that to our advantage for sure. All right, so I want you to get some base tones down on this, and as I'm as I'm really bad at zooming, okay, I guess there's auto zoom. Okay, this is, I imagine, really fun to watch. Stop. Okay, I'll stop. Okay, so now that I've got this, I'll put it in focus. This is not a perfect system. I'm going to look at my hand again. All right, where is it lighter? Where is it darker? Definitely lighter in the middle of probably each one of these fingers. Definitely darker along this edge, right? A little bit darker on where my knuckles are, like more blood vessels there, kind of bringing blood to the surface. So I'm going to look at that and start to add that in. So over here, I'm going to add extra shading. Same with that. I'm still keeping to that 2H pencil, right? And I'm just going to bring in, and you can even start to do a little bit of swirling circular kind of motions. That might be helpful to kind of bring in some of that extra tone. I can see this already is not enough. So I'm going to bump up. 2H pencil's gone as far as it can go. I'm going to go to the HB pencil. And this is definitely adding some darker tone, which I like. So I'm going to go add a little bit more tone around the knuckles. Okay. It's not the greatest to do a comparison next to this as I'm drawing, but here you can see darker through the knuckles and definitely along the sides of the fingers. So I'm adding that tone in. My contour lines are starting to disappear a little bit, but that's okay. They're mostly just place markers at the moment. We can always bring them back later. So I'm adding this value in. Feel free to pause and fill in as you go. This does not have to be synchronized drawing lesson, but I do want you to think about where you see light and dark overall and really start to bring that into your composition. We can see this already is starting to give the hand more shape and dimension. Feels like it's more round, which is good. When I look at the ring, there's definitely some darker areas in through here. I'm going to look again at the contour of that, and I can see that this line kind of comes in here. I get a little bit more darkness in through here. I'm doing this loose and light without much point. You don't want to use the point of the pencil. You definitely want to use the side of the lead. Okay. All right, and getting some more depth and dimension as I go. Just kind of building it up. There we go. Okay. A lot more tone on this part of the hand down here too. Now, one thing about this, to give it more dimension, I can start thinking about how I'm using the marks. So if I bring in curvilinear marks along the finger like this, if I do something called cross contour, that will help a lot too. So I'm circling in this way, and then I'm also going to circle in this way a little bit. And that's going to help give a little bit more dimension and depth to the hand as well. You can see how that's starting to give a sense of roundness. So that can often be really helpful too, to think about if you see any line work that's kind of like cross contour going in multiple different directions, but still kind of curving around the finger, right? And that can really give some nice depth and dimension to the tone. A couple of tricks that I might want to mention. If you want to really soften this, sometimes people like to do some blending and things, and we do have this little tortillon tool that you can use. This is not good for doing the whole area. This is really good for doing little micro components like that. But what I like to do sometimes is just take a paper towel, just crunch it up into a little ball. All right, and you can even use this circular motion, not a lot of pressure, to kind of blend a little bit. And this will soften the tone on the page. It will add, what it does is it's pushing some of the graphite into the valleys of the page, and it kind of blends it and smooths it. It also seems to darken it a little bit, which is okay. I like that. What I can do now is I can always go back and clean up around those contour lines, which I started with, the kneaded eraser. Clean that up. All right, between the fingers. And I can also use the eraser to help bring out some of the highlights. There's definitely like a lighter part in the finger here. So I can just take this, I'm gonna knead it up a little bit flat, and then I'm just gonna kind of buff it in a little bit and take away some of the value. So we can make additive marks and we can make subtractive marks using the eraser. And that you can see starts to pull some of the highlights out of the fingers as well, which is good. This is kind of sloppy looking, but that's okay. I think the next step that I would do with this now is start to confirm it a little bit further. I'm going to go back to my, maybe let's zoom in on this one finger so we can forgive the crazy zoom again. Let's see how we do. All right, that's not so bad. Let's focus. Okay, let's work on this weird crooked finger for a little bit. I've brought in some highlights, some shadows. I'm going to add some tone into the fingernail using vertical lines like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go into some of the more details. So I'm going to look for the line work that I see, definitely along the edges here. Confirm this outside a little bit more. Shade that in a little bit darker. Start to look for where there's more cross hatching along the side of the finger. Probably start to confirm these edges a little bit more, which need a little bit more darkness. So one thing we're looking for here is the idea of a gradient. On the finger, I can definitely see that there's a gradient tone from light to dark. And if I start to add a little bit more pressure to the outside and lessen the pressure as I go inside, I can get a little bit of that gradient tone to start to work and make this look like it has more depth and dimension. I want to encourage you to really start to push contrast. Contrast has to do with the range of value or tone between the light areas and the dark areas. So if it's dark and you see it looks dark, definitely add it in. Because again, what that's going to do is help your light areas look lighter. Okay, I'm going to go back and start to confirm some of these lines again that need a little bit of stronger depth to them. Going silent here for a minute, forgive me. Really concentrated on looking closely and drawing, trying to get as much information in as I can. Making mistakes, correcting mistakes, adding, subtracting. Now we're just going to go into this tortillon blending stick and just kind of soften a few areas a little bit. I like to kind of blur out the crease lines a little bit. So they look a little bit more naturalistic. Some of the texture of the paper looks like the pockiness of my flesh, so I'm going to keep that, not blend it too much. And then I'm just going to go back and kind of clean up a little bit around here. It's not too bad, you know, live session. So what I've got going here, let's get the, all right, that's not so bad. It looks a little bit better on the screen. I'm going to confirm this edge a little bit for my nail. There we go, a little broken. It's a little broken there. Okay, so I would just keep working this a little bit, you know, just keep going back and forth, confirming darker areas where it needs to be darker, lightening areas where it needs to be lighter. But overall, I'm pretty happy with that one digit. It's looking, you know, pretty close to the original there. And what I want you to do is to, you know, focus on trying to get as much detail and tone and dimension as you can on this drawing. When you get a lot of value on the page, what you'll notice is that your hand will start to track things around. So if we look here, you see these marks here that I've made? This is actually from my hand. I don't know if you can see that. It's hard to get that tonation. There you go. All this graphite sticks to the oils in your skin. So if I do this and I do this, I'm going to start to make some marks, right? So I think it's helpful. What I start to do at this stage is, I'll just take a sheet of paper and put it down, napkin or anything, and put your hand on it and draw. That way your skin doesn't track that around. Try to avoid that because, you know, the oils will eventually soak into the paper. You can erase them now, but later on they might be more permanent. So kneaded eraser is good for that. Once you're totally done, I typically clean up with a white eraser. So the white eraser is like the bulldozer of the erasers, right? Takes everything away. But sometimes it can leave marks. So what I mean by that is if you erase early on in the drawing and then you go and blend tone, you might see the eraser marks from this eraser. Definitely not from the kneaded eraser. So when you start the drawing, any editing, you use the kneaded eraser. This is the cleanup eraser. So I'll go in here and I'll press down hard and I'll erase everything back to a nice bright white background, kind of clean things up as I go. I often don't take my hands like this. I'll maybe take a piece of paper towel and just kind of like go like that. I actually have a brush that I use as well to kind of brush away the shavings. But overall, you know, I think that this is a good start. What I want you to do is to really try to the best of your ability, and this is going to take practice. It's just like it's taking me practice to zoom out of this drawing. What I want you to do is to complete this entire hand drawing, really thinking about the value and tonation line work by using a variety of different pencils, okay? 2 different erasers. You can certainly use the tortillon tool and try blending a little bit with paper towel to get that nice sort of surface down. So that's step 1 of the hand drawing. Really try to make an accurate representation of your hand. One recommendation is, you know, with most phones, my phone does not want to turn on now for some reason. Hello, camera. Okay. So with most, I'm going to get I'll do this white piece of paper there. Okay. Most phones, what you can do is you can actually take a picture of your hand. Okay. There we go. Okay. And let's see if I can edit it. Okay. Edit. Go into black and white. And I can change it to black and white, right? So that is good because now I can look at my hand in black and white and try to think about the tonal range that you see. I don't know if you can see that very well, but in color, it's a little bit different to understand than it is in black and white. And if you want to use your phone as a tool to help you do that, it's a great way to make that comparison, just to be able to see in black and white. So step 1, draw the hand, photograph the hand, and I'll have a submission area on Blackboard where you can submit that. There will be a part 2 of this project, but I don't want to spoil the surprise. So to begin with, your goal is to trace your hand and make an accurate representation. Think about what you notice and practice ways of replicating that on the surface of the page using the variety of pencils. And that, my friends, is pretty much all for now. I'm going to sign off. If you have questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to do one-on-one chats on Tuesdays. We can do office hours via Zoom. I'll send the link out for that. And it'll be a good chance for me to see what you're up to and give you feedback, give you some live feedback if you need. But anyway, take care. I'll see you soon.